All right, so we're going to begin a very important topic tonight, somewhat of a continuation from last week when we spoke about the Torah and modern scientific knowledge. Even though tonight is really a follow-up or a second part to that topic, it's really a topic in itself, which I called protecting the Torah from heretical beliefs. Most of you know what heretical beliefs are, heresy. All kinds of beliefs that are out there that are contrary to Torah beliefs and that pose a danger, a continuous danger that threatens to undermine what we've always held so dear. It is something that not every Jew is aware of, but the Torah is very clear that from time to time, in every generation, there will be threats to our faith and physical threats, all kinds of threats that the Jew will have to deal with. Some of these threats will be external, and some of these threats will be internal. In other words, some will be coming from other nations, and some will be coming from within the Jewish camp. And these are threats that we have to take very seriously, because they will threaten not only our nation, but our beliefs. And for those who read history, Jewish history, world history, this is common knowledge. This has actually happened, and it's still happening to some extent. There's a continuous threat, for some reason, that is not always clear, but it's always out there. Now this threat is on top of the daily threat that every human being faces. The threat from his own evil inclination, from being tempted to go against God's will. Whether it is to accepting a bribe, becoming corrupt, stealing, and committing all kinds of crimes. Every human being is challenged. We're all tempted from time to time. Some people succumb, and some people are stronger, and they resist. So here we have, on top of that, on top of the regular threats that surround us, that we have to deal with, contend with on a regular basis, and they are difficult, now we have to worry about some external threat, some outside threat, whether it's from some other nation, other people, other religions, or from within our own camp. To better understand what threat we're talking about, let's take a look at what the rabbis say is the threat, the internal threat that we all have. He has different names. He is called the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. He is also called the Satan, the Satan. And he's also the Malach HaMavet, the angel of death. So you have three personifications, I guess you can say, of the same threat. Initially, he's the evil inclination. He tempts you to do that which is wrong. And after one leaves this world, he's the Satan. He will be the one to accuse you. He's the one that will take your soul. He's the Malach HaMavet, the angel of death. It's all the same camp. It's all from the Sitra Hara, from the other side, the impure forces. In the same way that we have these constant threats, we also have a threat that is embodied in the physical world, not in the spiritual world. A threat that is embodied in human beings. And these human beings, what they all have in common is to go against the will of God. Either by falsifying what God says or by misleading. That is generally their agenda. And they come in different colors, in different shapes. They all may look somewhat different and speak different languages and live in different times, but that's the common denominator. They're against spirituality, therefore they're against the Torah, they're against the Jewish mission. And we spoke about it at length in the lecture about Amalek, what Amalek represents. What I have not perhaps said recently, and that is why it's important to emphasize it at this time, is that even though that threat we're somewhat more familiar with, it's the more dangerous one that we sometimes forget about, and that is the threat from within, the enemy from within. That is a more dangerous threat. And who are they? The Torah lists them. It should come as no surprise. The Torah warns us ahead of time. Listen, you have this document, you have these laws, you have this very, very special mission that you need to carry out as a people. Just be careful. Pay attention. God says, I will list for you the various kinds of threats that you will be facing in the future. And this will be in every generation pretty much, from time to time, in almost every corner of the globe. And they are as follows. There will be, at times, a Navi Sheker, a false prophet. He will claim to be a prophet. He will claim to be a messenger from God. But he's a faker. He's false. And there are ways to test an individual if he's a real prophet or not. There are certain conditions that that individual has to meet to qualify to being a prophet. And if he does not meet those conditions, then we know he's false. But the Torah is already telling us this is going to be a threat because a prophet is a powerful individual. He's supposedly communicating to us a message from God. But it may be the wrong message. So be careful, watch out for him. Then there's a mesit umediach, those that will tempt you and those that will mislead you in all kinds of ways. And throughout our history, we've had groups, not just individuals, who tried to form a different camp, whether it was the Sadducees, the Tzdukim, whether it was later on the Karaites. And we have today, unfortunately, various groups within Jewry that has a different message, that obviously wants to form some sort of other religion that is based on Judaism, but is not Judaism. And that is the Reform Judaism. Unfortunately, and I emphasize unfortunately because I really feel bad for many people who belong in that community who don't even realize themselves what they're losing out. And it's not their fault. It's the fault of their leaders. The real mesitim umedichim, the ones who have been misleading so many people into believing that this is sufficient, this watered down, diluted form of Judaism. This is it, that's all you need to conform. This is not Judaism. It's a brand new religion that's based on Judaism, but it's not Judaism. It cannot be called Judaism. Even Christians know what Judaism is. Muslims know what Judaism is. The Torah spells it out clearly. But what did we just say? The Torah warns us ahead of time. There will be all kinds of groups, individuals that will threaten Judaism, will threaten our faith in various ways, using different tactics. And what's the common denominator between all of them? The Torah calls them shoresh poreh rosh vela'ana, a very interesting description that if perhaps we can compare it to weeds, that would be a good description. It's shoresh poreh rosh vela'ana means a bitter herb that grows and causes damage to the surroundings. You have a beautiful garden, you don't want weeds. And this is not just a weed, this is a bitter weed. This can mislead. People are sometimes naive. I shouldn't say sometimes, maybe most of the time. Especially if they're ignorant. Especially if somebody is charismatic and appeals to them in a nice way. If the individual, the victim, is going through some difficulties in his life, they may more readily accept what they're being told if it sounds somehow easy to comply with. So there are various methods that all these individuals have tried throughout history to ensnare, to trap people, communities. An entire community sometimes was threatened with either accepting this new belief or being expelled, or being killed. So throughout our history, we see all kinds of pressures, all kinds, from outside and from within. But what did we just finish saying? It's the one from within that is most troublesome. As the prophet says, the one that will give you the most trouble is me'arsaychu machrivaychu mechyetzeu. It's the ones that will come from your midst. They will give you the most trouble. And I wish I would not have to talk about this, but this is a fact that we have to come to terms with. We have to realize it, that there's a problem out there with many, many individuals who simply are not proud of who they are. It's psychological. There's something that they may have experienced in their youth. They may be very upset, disappointed, troubled. And now, in order to justify what they're doing, they need to convince others to follow along. Because if they remain the way they want to remain, and others don't follow, they may have guilty feelings, it may bother them, right? It may perhaps discourage them from doing what they were going to do. So here, by convincing others, by pulling along others, this may give them a better feeling that what they're doing is right. Otherwise, why don't you mind your own business? Why are you going out in this missionary work to convince others who are really happy and convinced that what they have is good and right and truth? Why? Maybe you're bothered by something. Maybe you're not sure of yourself. So the Torah warns us, there will be all kinds of individuals like that. Just briefly, let's talk a little bit about the threat from outside. The Jewish people have had to contend with certain religions that wanted to force upon us their religion, their faith. And their claim was, listen, God no longer likes you. He kicked you out of your home. He destroyed your home, the temple. He was upset at you, and he scattered you all over the world. As he said he would do in the Torah. He's upset. And why is he upset? Because you obviously misbehaved. You committed many transgressions. And therefore, you're kicked out of your land, which is true. We're outside in the diaspora until this day. The temple is destroyed, 2 temples. So he no longer likes you. We, instead of you, are the chosen people. Become like us. What's the problem with this? What's faulty with this way of thinking? If you read the Torah, and you don't stay ignorant, but you learn what the Hashem wants of us, what God says to us, in the Torah and in the Nevi'im Uktuvim, in the prophets, in the scriptures, the writings, if you read clearly, you will see that even though the Jewish people may have become distant from God, even though they may have become exiled from their land, the time will come when they will all return to the land. The time will come when many of them, hopefully most of them, if not all of them, will return to their roots, will repent. The Torah says it will happen. We just happen to be living in the 21st century where we are actually observing this. Had I been speaking to you in 1905, there was no state of Israel. Just recently. And we would be reading the same prophets and we would say, yeah, God willing, may this happen in the lifetime of my grandchildren. This is remote. We see it today. Do you know that almost half the Jewish population of the world is already in Israel? What is that? That's not a prophecy that has come true. Then what is it? They just all decided to come home on their own? I mean, think about it. So we see that already happening. So even though it's true that God was upset at us, but in the end, he promised, and he's keeping his promise, that they're going to come back home. What about that the religion will be changed? The religion has been changed, some say. There's a new religion out there. You got to believe in this, and you got to believe in that. You don't need to do that. You don't need to keep this. There's a new religion out there. The Torah tells us about that too. God promises this religion will always be the only religion that I want you to have. It will not be replaced by another religion. Other nations may have their own beliefs and faith, yes. But for you, this is it. I will not change it. This is my contract with you. Lo tiyeh muchlefet haTorah azot. This Torah will be the same forever, for eternity. It says so clearly. It's not inferred. It's not insinuated. It's clearly there. For those who want to see it, it's there. What about a false prophet? Well, if somebody says he's a prophet from God and he wants to change, you should know he's a liar. The Torah says that too. So anybody that says, I changed my mind in any way, you should know he's lying. And here comes my favorite. To those who still think that God changed his mind, that God wants to give a new Torah, a new laws, then I have a proposition. The same God that appeared to us in Har Sinai, in Matan Torah, and gave us the Torah in public, in a very convincing manner, he has to do the same thing all over again. He would have to repeat the same thing, nothing less, nothing more. The exact same thing that happened years ago when the Jewish people said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will follow you blindly. We will do as you say. In order for us to be convinced of anything different, anything new, we need the same kind of proof. Not coming from one man or from a group of people telling us, hey, you guys should be doing this now. How can we replace the Word of God with the message, the wrong message, that human beings are giving us? If God wants to change, and he said he will not, but if he did want to, then he has to do it the exact same way that he did it in the first time. Nothing less. But as we said earlier, the greater danger is the danger from within. And that's a little bit what we need to talk about tonight. What exactly is going on today that presents a danger? There are various groups out there, and some of them are somewhat observant of the Torah as well, who are scoffing the words of the rabbis, of our sages, making fun of some details that are even found in the Torah. And what are the repercussions to that? It's very similar to what Amalek does. Amalek has the power to cool people off from their faith. Cool them off. There's no God. God is not involved in this world. Everything happens by chance. This Torah, was written by some committee to dampen the spirit that was always strong. And how do they do it? They just can't tell you, convince you, oh, this is not true. They have to prove it. They have to do something to prove you, to convince to you. So they try to find details in the Torah and in the Talmud that don't add up, that seem to be in conflict with science. So today that science is so advanced and has progressed so much, and there's so much knowledge that is out there, it is easier for these individuals to look for trouble. They have their internet at their disposal. They have hundreds of thousands of books they can access, facts, scientific facts that they can look up. As you see, and they point, look what scientists are saying, and look what the Torah says, or look what the rabbi said in the Talmud. You see, there's something wrong. Perhaps they made a mistake. It's not divine after all, God forbid. These are the kinds of messages that some individuals out there are trying to sell. And some people are buying it. As we said, this is the real danger today especially, from within. So we need to address this. It's always important to keep in mind when you hear somebody raising a question, questioning something that was not questionable in the past. He has some doubt. we have to keep in mind that it's always important to try to figure out why an individual casts doubt, why he has questions, what's really motivating him. Are we dealing with a real discussion where one really wants to suggest something, where one wants to receive some answer to a question? Or are we talking about polemics? Do you know what polemics are? When somebody wants to aggressively voice his own opinion without giving you a chance to answer back, where one wants to convince you of what he believes. And he does it usually in a very rough way, in an insulting way. That's called polemics. There's all kinds of levels of polemics. Nonetheless, it's not as nice and it's not as honest as a regular discussion between two people, two individuals who are trying to figure out the truth. When do you usually have polemics? Whenever you're dealing with a subject that is controversial. Creation is very controversial. If creation is true, then obviously it means that people have to behave themselves in a certain way. They may be held accountable by this God. So anytime you have a controversial topic, you may have polemics. You may have people that will be very, very upset, that they will say things, whether it is to discredit you or to poke fun at some fact, regardless of whether it's true or not. That is why we need to understand some rules when it comes to understanding the words of the sages. And any time that one wants to offer an opinion, you should follow these rules. One of the most important rules is that when you have a differing opinion about some topic, if you do it l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven, then you have a chance that your opinion will actually contribute to the benefit of all. The famous machloket of Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai, the two schools of thought, religious schools of thought, Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai, they did not always agree. They had differing opinions about what the halakha, the ruling, should be in a particular case. In the end, the ruling was given, a decision was made, and for the most part, Bet Hillel's opinion was chosen. But the discussions between them was l'shem shamayim. It was for the sake of heaven. What does it mean, for the sake of heaven? For the sake of heaven means to determine the truth, to determine what is the halakha, which one should be applied in this kind of a situation. They were always searching for the truth. That's all that mattered to them, no personal agendas. So whenever you're dealing with a confrontation of this sort, where there are some who are arguing that they know better, that they have the facts, what's important to keep in mind is not what people are arguing about, but how and why they are arguing. Not so much what they're arguing about, but how and why. Look at their inner motivation. What's motivating? Why is it bringing them out to cast doubt, to argue? What's going on in their mind? That's more important than the actual topic that is being discussed. Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai wanted the benefit of the Jewish people. They wanted to strengthen the observance of the mitzvot, of the commandments. They wanted to make sure that it will be accepted by all. And they therefore discussed openly, many, many times, which one is the correct halakha, which one applies. Even though they were both right, in principle, they were both right. Either of the two could be correct. But which one needed to be implemented? I saw somebody explain why it's called l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. Not only is it for the sake of God, for the sake of the truth. What's shamayim? The Hebrew word shamayim comes from esh and mayim, fire and water. A description of our atmosphere. Fire and water. In fire and water, we know are two opposites. So what you have between Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai is opposing principles united for the fulfillment of God's will. Just like upstairs in the atmosphere, we have opposing forces, opposing elements united to make an atmosphere for this world. They're united to do the will of God. In the same way, the machloket, the discussion of Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai, even though they were different, in other words, even though they held different opinions, but they were united in doing the will of God. Another important detail that I think is very, very important to add and emphasize is that when one does have a differing opinion, when one does want to suggest whatever it may be, even if he's right, he should be very careful from Chilul Hashem, not to desecrate God's name. Otherwise, he's spoiling everything that he intended to do. Don't think that the end justifies the means. No. It's not true, not always. If the means are asur, if the means are prohibited, if the means are wrong, don't do it. Don't suggest it. Drop it. It's not worth it. The damage of the Chilul Hashem, of the disgrace to God, is worse than whatever contribution you want to make. It's not worth it. Even if you're right, be careful from Chilul Hashem. Another important principle, whenever it comes to opinions, and there's always different opinions, and that's okay, it's acceptable, as long as it's l'shem shamayim, of course, if it's for the sake of heaven, you want to ascertain the truth. However, once a decision or a vote has been made, once a decision has been announced, accept the majority view. There may be opinions out there, many opinions. We follow the majority view. If a decision has been announced, a vote has been taken, we follow the majority view. And what that means is that anyone who held a minority opinion has to give it up. You can't choose to go by that minority opinion. There are very few instances in halacha where you can side with a minority opinion. A few cases, a few examples, but for the most part, if a decision has been made, you need to accept the majority view. In turning to the words of our sages, the verse says, Sod Hashem lire'av. The mysteries or the secrets of God are given to those who fear Him. This world is full of mysteries. There are many layers to the Torah, including the mystical layer, the Kabbalah. A lot of the hidden information in the Torah is not accessible to all. To who does God give it? Who does He share it with? Lire'av, to those who fear Him. But it's not just about information that's given to those who fear God, to the sages. It's also about not misleading them. God would not want to mislead those who bear the Torah, the teachings, for future generations. Those who have this responsibility of teaching, of handing down the Masorah, the tradition, they're going to hopefully do an accurate job. Otherwise, God would not choose them as bearers of the truth, of the teachings. Can human beings make mistakes? Yes, on an individual level, it's possible. Or even on a community level. The Torah says so. Even Moses made a mistake. But these are not mistakes that will affect the future. These are mistakes that happen for whatever reason. They can happen. They could be messages from above. And they need to be dealt with. They need to be corrected. But teachings for the future, teachings that affect many, many generations to come, teachings that will be in writing, in print, God will not mislead those who are truly righteous, those who are the bearers of His truth, of the Torah. Impossible. But there are a lot of people who have complained that some things just don't make sense to them. Okay, if things don't make sense to you, does that mean the one who wrote it made a mistake? Just because you don't understand it? Perhaps you don't know how to interpret what is written. When something does not make sense, or when something seems to be contradicting some other fact, as you claim it does, then perhaps you're not interpreting the words that you're reading. There's also the possibility that a lot of the knowledge that existed in the past has been lost, and we know that. There was a book, Chizkiyahu HaMelech concealed a book of remedies for all the diseases that existed back then, that were around back then. He hid it. He didn't want people to turn to this book to find out the cure for every disease, because then they would not turn to God. There was tremendous amount of knowledge. There was a big library in Egypt that was destroyed, that contained tremendous amount of wisdom. So even though those generations before us may not have had the knowledge, and definitely not the technology that we have today, we shouldn't just look at them as though they were primitive in every respect. They may have known many, many things that we don't know, but a lot of it was lost. And if somebody does claim that they made a mistake, I would suggest that he's making a mistake. In other words, it's more likely that the individual who says, whoever that individual may be, he may be a great scholar, regardless of his stature, if he makes the following claim that those sages made a mistake, it's more likely that he's making a mistake. And I said regardless of who he is. And why? How can we be so confident that they knew better? Rabbis tell us, Sheyishna Yeridat Hadorot, the generations have been coming down, not only spiritually, but in knowledge. With every generation going by, there is a decline in knowledge, to a certain level of knowledge. I'm not talking about scientific knowledge, I'm talking about knowledge of God, pure knowledge, or the ability to comprehend divine knowledge, and of course a decline, a spiritual decline. So the generations today, for example, does not come close to the generation before us. And definitely not to 300, 400 years ago, and definitely not to 2,000 years ago. We're so far removed from them that we cannot compare ourselves to them. We therefore have no right to second guess them. And even if it's a great individual who lived 600, 700 years ago, who comes and says they made a mistake, he's wrong too. Why should he be wrong? Maybe if he lived 700 years ago, maybe he knows something that we don't know. Maybe he's qualified to say that. One of the mistakes that a lot of people make in believing that somebody, even though he was a great individual, knowledgeable individual, is not necessarily right, is because the rabbis, the sages of the time of the Gemara, of the Talmud, had not only Ruach HaKodesh, not only were they divinely inspired, they knew Kabbalah. Something that people did not know even 700, 800 years ago. It was only disseminated recently. And if you don't have the knowledge of the Kabbalah, then you cannot speak the language of the sages, of the rabbis. Because much of what they've said has to do with Kabbalistic insights. There's a very nice pasuk at the very beginning of Mishlei, Proverbs, that says like this. I'm going to read it in Hebrew then in English. Le'avin mashal u'melitza divrei chachamim v'chidotan. To understand an allegory and a figure, the word of the wise and their riddles. Shlomo HaMelech, the wisest man that ever lived, is telling us that much of what we read in the Talmud and in the Midrash is full of riddles. Agadot, drashot, mishalim, musar, whether it's ethics, whether it's parables, there's a lot of allegory in the words that they say. So they're not only teaching us halakha. The Talmud is not just about how to conduct ourselves in the area of halakha. But there's tremendous musar skill, there's tremendous insights into ethics and morals that are learned from all kinds of anecdotes, stories. And sometimes some of these stories are strange. If you read certain segments, certain portions of the Gemara, you wonder to yourself, could this really be? And you have to stop for a moment and remember that perhaps this is not literal. Maybe this is allegory. Maybe I don't, and even if it's not allegory, even if it's factual, perhaps I don't have clarity as to what they're saying because they did not elaborate as much as we would have loved them to elaborate. Anybody that begins to learn Gemara has a hard time, not only with the language, the Aramaic, or the mixed Hebrew-Aramaic. Not only does it have a hard time with certain concepts, but it's the method of question and answer and proof that the rabbis engage in that needs to be learned. So there's a lot that we don't understand from what the rabbis wrote only because it is presented in many ways in a method that is not so clear. The method of presenting the information that they're trying to convey to us is not always clear. So it's very easy for one to misunderstand what they're saying. Does that mean that they made a mistake? Does that mean that they're wrong? Perhaps we're just not understanding what they said. One of the best rules when you're dealing with something you don't understand in the Talmud, in the Torah, is to just say, I don't know. If there's ever a question about a fact that seems to be contradicting science, and they said something differently, if you're not sure, just say, I don't know. I don't know is also an acceptable answer. The rabbis sometimes say they don't know. There's nothing wrong. Don't be embarrassed to say, I don't know. It's safer to say, I don't know, than to say something that is wrong, especially if it's mocking the words of the sages. You know what that does to the individual? What it does to people who hear him? What example it sets to his children, that he's so disrespectful? What was so valued in the past, what was held so highly, this individual, because he has some doubts, the way he reacts and the way he describes it in a mocking way is very, very dangerous. People who have mocked the Torah have a very difficult time coming back, doing teshuvah, repenting. Because they're so cooled off from it, and they are to blame, of course, usually, that for them to say that they made a mistake is very difficult. It's to be able to climb down from the tree that they climbed and to say, you know, I was wrong. It takes a tremendous amount of humbleness to do that. Not everybody has that. That is why it's so dangerous. It's not only dangerous for those who are listening or reading what these people have to say, it's very dangerous for them. They don't realize that they're being trapped by the Yetzer Hara, by the evil inclination, who's leading them on. They have some sort of weakness, and the evil inclination, of course, takes that weakness, whether the weakness is arrogance, overconfidence, or whether the weakness is that this individual is depressed and disappointed. Regardless of what it is, people have weaknesses. And when somebody is a little bit intelligent and knowledgeable, as we said in the last lecture, it could be problematic because he will deal with this knowledge, the knowledge of the Torah, not in a very respectful way necessarily. He has to be very careful how he treads. So the fact that the rabbis were knowledgeable in many, many areas, they are bearers of the truth, and they were divinely inspired, and they knew Kabbalah, should remind all of us that we can't just question what they said so easily. We're too many generations removed. And even those rabbis who lived hundreds of years ago may not be able to question them necessarily, because they did not necessarily study Kabbalah. We have a tradition, by the way, that Maimonides, in his later years, studied some Kabbalah. And he said, had I known this in my earlier years, I would have written some things differently. If you read the works of Maimonides, he's very, very much against belief in demons, mysticism, astrology. He comes out against certain ideas that are expressed in the Talmud, and you wonder, wait a minute, it says so in the Talmud. How could it be that he comes out against them? He was a very logical man, a philosopher, a doctor, very knowledgeable. And there's no doubt that he was a great sage in his own right. One of my theories about why he wrote certain things, why he expressed himself so adamantly against certain beliefs that were clear and acceptable to all other rabbis, is because he was afraid. He was really afraid that certain communities will be misled by all kinds of beliefs, superstitious beliefs. As these beliefs have done damage in the past, people were misled into idolatry as a result of all kinds of practices and superstitious beliefs. So he wanted to basically minimize that. And there is proof that he was not completely against it, but he wanted to very much minimize it. So it was not so much that he was against it. He just did not want to overemphasize those things that he felt were a danger to the Jewish people in his times, in his generation. So basically, there's a lot of information in the words of the rabbis that we will not understand, that either are riddles or in the form of drashot, allegory, and it's not necessarily something that is a mistake. There's a good chance that it may be allegory, or it just may be something that we don't fully understand. I'm just going to give a few examples. There are quite a few. Just a few examples for those who may encounter them. There's a discussion about lice in the Gemara. All of us are familiar with lice. But certain halachot, certain rulings by the rabbis are discussed in the Gemara that deal with what appears to be science. Right? And they say that lice, because they don't procreate in the same way that other animals do, male and female, as a result of that, if one kills them on Shabbat and Sabbath, it's okay. In other words, because they are not really creatures that are forbidden to be killed on Shabbat in the same way that other creatures are forbidden to be killed on Shabbat. Okay? I'm just trying to simplify it. But wait a minute. Lice don't procreate the same as other animals? Of course they do. There's male and there's female lice. And by the way, there's a lot of kinds of lice. What a lot of people forget when they study that portion of the Talmud is something called parthenogenesis. Parthenogenesis in Greek means virgin beginning, virgin creation. There are certain animals, certain species that can at times multiply, procreate in an asexual way. Asexuality means that there's no need for a male and female. Some can do it both ways, depending on the species. And there's quite a few, by the way, that have been observed doing that. So this is nothing new. So my way of understanding that is very simple. It's talking about that. Now, even though head lice, the type of lice that affects the head, which is what they were talking about, does not necessarily qualify as the lice that I'm talking about right now. But the point here is the rabbis are able to use a rule called binyan av. Binyan av is one of the ways that one derives halachot, one derives or infers certain halachot from the Torah by the principle of binyan av. In other words, if I find a concept that is described in one place of the Torah or in one place of the rabbis, it's the same idea, the same concept. I infer from that that this applies to the whole class, to the whole mitzvah. So this concept of binyan av is basically saying that we infer that since within this class of lice, there are some that reproduce in this form, then it applies, the rule applies to all of them, even though some may not. That's at least what I would like to suggest. I mean, there may be other explanations for it. They said knim, and they did not necessarily say this yes and this not, even though there's clearly enough information in the Gemara to say that they were aware that there are those that do procreate in a normal way, that there are male and female. However, there are some that don't. There's a lot of discussion about spontaneous generation, as though the rabbis believed in spontaneous generation, which Pasteur disproved. You know what spontaneous generation means? In other words, that things just come out of nothing. Just like that. Now, just remember, just because science has proven certain things, it doesn't mean it will not be disproven tomorrow. In other words, it could be that at some point in time, we may discover that certain things evolve in some other way. As long as there's something there, some ingredient there, there has to be some ingredient to enable it. But let's assume that spontaneous generation is not exactly the way some people thought. It doesn't mean that the rabbis subscribe to that. When the rabbis explain that things come out on their own because there's sweat, or because there's certain filth, or because there's something there that produces it or that helps produce it, it doesn't mean that it just happens without anything else there. They were aware, and I have proof to that there's microorganisms in the air. And when a piece of meat rots, it's because of the microorganisms that have been falling on it from the air. And if you were to sterilize the room, then it wouldn't rot. So just because the rabbis didn't use the word microorganisms, it doesn't mean that they believe that things just happen by themselves. What they meant is that you don't observe it happening. That's all. And somehow it's happening because the eggs are there, or something is there, the spores, or whatever you want to call it, that's making it happen even though you're not seeing the male and female together. It's another form of procreation. There are different forms of procreation. Then there's something about the nails of a cat. They have poison. The Gemara there discusses that if a cat attacks and claws an animal, whether an animal can survive or not, because supposedly the cat has poison in the nails. Once it sticks its claws, it releases the poison. It's not so. I mean, these are facts that anybody can check. It doesn't. Some people want to claim that they were unaware. How could you be unaware of this? You could check it out. These are not things that are secrets. These are not things that you need a microscope. Either it's true or it's not true. If they made that claim, they were most likely talking about bacteria or rabies or certain diseases that cats can cause as a result of their scratching. I mean, these are known facts to scientists today and back then. Nothing new. Then why try to say that they made a mistake, that they don't know what they were talking about? These are things that are easily provable. And we know that rabies and certain diseases are carried in the nail, especially in the nails of cats, dogs, raccoons, foxes. Certain animals more than others have the potential to transmit diseases, all kinds of diseases, including rabies. So obviously they knew that certain things can happen in a certain way. Then there is the famous example of a bat that lays eggs, where the Gemara says, you know, that there's one bird that is a mammal and lays eggs. That's the atalif. And that's the only one. Gemara, in discussing the various kinds of species and how they collect their food, and in how they give birth. So some have a live birth, and some, have it through an egg that they lay. So the atalef, the bat, supposedly it's called the bat, He's the only one that lays eggs, but he's a mammal. In other words, it's something unique, because we know birds are not mammals, right? And here you have the bat, which is a mammal. So everybody gets confused by this little detail in the bat, which also lays eggs, but it's a mammal. They don't forget the main idea that is being expressed here is not so much the egg laying as the fact, which is very unique, that the bat is the only real, true flying creature that is a mammal. That is what's unique here. Now, what's the eggs doing here with the bat? Bats don't lay eggs. Well, if the atalef is a bat, it's a question. Perhaps it's a different form of fertilization that takes place within the bat that is similar to the kind of fertilization of the egg that happens in chickens and other birds. That it holds it back for a while, for the right time, until it gives birth. There can be other explanations for it, or it could be another animal. Either way, the main idea here was not the fact that it lays eggs, but the fact that it's the only flying mammal. And that's the main idea being expressed here. That's what's so unique. What's the eggs doing there? You know, that's open to discussion, but that's not so important. Anytime you see this kind of questions, it's always best to just give them the benefit of the doubt. A lot of people forget about this beautiful characteristic called Ladunet Adam Lechav Zechut. We're told, we're asked, give everybody the benefit of the doubt. You don't really know what his thinking is. We're told to give God the benefit of the doubt, of why he allowed the Holocaust to happen, why he allowed certain things to take place. Give him the benefit of the doubt. He knows better. The sages who are entrusted with the Torah, give them the benefit of the doubt. And don't rush to conclusions that they made a mistake. The only area where one does have a little bit of flexibility in how to interpret is the area of medicine. In the area of medicine, we already have clear instructions from great rabbis that the medicine that the rabbis spoke about in the time of the Talmud may not apply today. It applied at their time, in their generation, with their the conditions of life that existed then. Or it could be that simply we don't know how to apply that medicine. Or it could be that it's no longer applicable because of all kinds of vaccinations that we have today. In other words, there's a lot of reasons why you don't want to depend on that and try it. Because if you try it and it doesn't work for you, you'll say, oh, they made a mistake, it's not true. Don't even try it, we're advised. The area of medicine, not all of what they say may be applicable. Some of it is still applicable, but not everything. And there's various reasons for that. So in the area of medicine, there's several possibilities of why it's not applicable today. So therefore, don't make the mistake of getting confused by those few passages in the Talmud that don't really make sense, when there's so much more that does make sense. You know, people like to pick. You see? This doesn't make sense, this is not right, this can't be right, this is a mistake. Wait a minute, what about everything else? You know, no one's perfect, right? But people like to pick on certain things. Oh, she's like this, or he's like that. Between husband and wives, I see it all the time. Somebody comes to complain to me about his wife. You know, she's just, you know, not a good cook. I asked him, but does she take care of the kids? Oh, she's a great mother. Well, be happy. Look, no one's perfect. Why are you just picking on this? Don't look at the negative. Don't look at what you don't like. Look, there's so much to like about the person. Or the same with the husband. Oh, he's always angry at me. Does he buy you a gift from time to time? Does he show you any affection? Does he support you? Oh, yes, he's the greatest husband in that way. Well, you should be happy. Nobody has all the pluses. Nobody's perfect. So when we see something that doesn't seem right to us, good chance, first of all, that it's our fault, that we don't understand it right, that we're not interpreting it right. And besides that, there's so much wisdom out there. There's so much good. There's so much things that do make sense and they are clear. Focus on that. Don't put so much effort into those areas that are really minuscule in trying to prove a point that is dangerous. It's dangerous. First of all, it's wrong. Most likely it's wrong. And the fact that it can have terrible negative consequences makes it even worse. Just like to finish that we must not forget that this is the Messianic era. This is Yemot HaMashiach. We're being tested. That's what the series was all about. Challenges, struggles, trials of the 21st century. There's one more lecture to go. Very important lecture about, you want to guess? I'm calling it the pains of spiritual growth. You know, there's the pains of growth. How do you grow? How can you grow spiritually in such a generation, at such a time, when there's so many challenges? Faith is being challenged today more than ever, and we must not forget about it. I think the best way to look at it, at this challenge, have you ever seen a sign? Caution, slippery floor?
Yeah.
Right? Fresh paint. So I'm cautioning you. It's a slippery floor outside. Very slippery. People are falling. They're not paying attention. And in the East Coast right now, a lot of people are falling because of the ice.
Yeah.
Very slippery. It's a slippery floor because there's a lot of unknown to us because we're so far removed from our sages, from the Torah. Back then they were much more knowledgeable, much stronger, had greater clarity. We don't have the same, but we have to, and therefore we have to be careful not to question them. Anyway, we have a rule, we have a tradition. Those who really want to find the truth, those who want to pursue the truth, those who want to belong to the camp of God, and not, God forbid, to the other camp. Those who will really try hard to do the right thing. Hashem, Bezat Hashem, will help them. They will receive Bezat Hashem divine assistance. Amen.